Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing the new album from Death Grips, Year of the Snitch. And this is Death Grips' follow-up to their last full-length album, Bottomless Pit, that was released in 2016. I enjoyed that album a fair bit. I thought it was pretty great overall, but it still is one of my least favorite Death Grips projects to date, mostly because it just kind of redid a lot of the ideas that Death Grips have done before on previous albums, though it did so in a way that was still very enjoyable. Like I said, I still think that was a really enjoyable project overall. It was like in my top 15 albums of that year. You could actually go back, see my video for that, and it is, there. But I still do enjoy that project. I don't want to make it out like I dislike Bottomless Pit or anything like that. And then they also released the Steroids EP last year, which I did also really enjoy. It was just a pretty interesting project overall, made one of my favorite EPs of 2017. So I was really excited to see what Death Grips were going to do here on this project, and I was hoping that they were going to move more in a less safe direction than what Bottomless Pit was. And to an extent, I feel like I got that here on this album. If I were to rank Death Grips projects in terms of how experimental or just weird they are, Bottomless Pit would probably be more towards the bottom of that list. Steroids would probably be higher on that list. This kind of falls somewhere in the middle, I feel, because it does have some interesting moments on it that are different than anything that we've ever really seen from Death Grips before. There are also some moments on here that I feel are a bit familiar, but not necessarily in a bad way either. It's an interesting mix that we get here on this album, and it overall makes for a very enjoyable listen. The album begins with one of my favorite cuts on it. Death Grips is online, and I just love the kind of synth part that's going on here in this track that opens up the track and just continues throughout it. I just find it really addicting for some strange reason. I think it's a fantastic opening song here. And I also love the second track, Flies, as well, just kind of how savage this track can sound at times. I love how the vocals in the verses at times kind of go from sounding just very aggressive and just very out of control to, in the same breath almost sounding very, controlled to an extent, but still, it's like teetering on the edge of just, being in control and not in control, which is something that I really liked seeing that dynamic in the verses here of this track. It's just very aggressive and in your face. And I love the, beat that they were going with here on this track as well. It just really rounded things off very nicely. I feel like these two opening songs here back to back are two of the best on the album overall. And then the track that immediately follows this, Black Paint, I also find to be really enjoyable. I like how Death Grips are showing some of the rock elements here on this track as well. Not necessarily that they're strangers to that, but I found it to be a very interesting aspect of this track. Another one of my favorite cuts on the album is actually the closing track, Disappointed. This one just has a very aggressive feel to it in terms of the vocals and just everything else here that's going on. It's easily one of my favorites here in the track listing. I think it's a great closer as well, especially after the outro track, which I'm not really sure what they were going for with that outro sort of interlude type track thing. I feel like it is one of the weakest moments here on the album because, based on the name of the track, it kind of feels like it's supposed to be, an outro, but of course it's not the outro because there's another track that comes after it. But it's not really like a surprise or like a bonus track or anything. I just don't know what they were going for with that. And it wasn't all that interesting, that outro little thing. I don't consider it really a full song, but it is one of the weaker moments on the album, even though it isn't really all that bad. I feel like the horn section is another very short kind of interlude-ish type track that we get on here that I feel like was executed a lot better than outro. I just feel like it was a lot more interesting. I feel like it contributed a lot more to the album overall and just held my attention a lot better than the outro little thing. But then again, like I said, it's like a minute long. It's not really all that much of like an intrusion to the enjoyment of this album. The lead single from this thing, Streaky, is definitely one that I feel like it plays things a bit safer because I can feel some of those more modern hip-hop type influences here on this track. However, Death Grips do kind of take it and make it their own. It's not necessarily like they're trying to imitate what's in the mainstream. It's more like they're kind of pulling some influences here or there and then just Death Gripsing them up, which is to be expected from them. And it's a track that, while I really enjoyed it when it was first released, in the context of the album overall, it's probably one of my least favorite tracks overall, though it still is pretty good. It just didn't excite me quite as much with repeated listens of the album as a whole as much as it did on its own, or as much as some of these other tracks did in the context of this record. But it still is a pretty solid track overall. I do also feel like there's maybe a few other tracks on here that aren't quite as memorable, like Linda's in Custody, which is another fine track. In fact, in some other albums by some other groups, I feel like it would probably stand out as being a pretty great track. But here on a Death Grips album, it's just a bit more average, I guess you could say, as far as this track listing goes. An aspect about this album that I feel like could also cause some, not necessarily controversy, but some differing opinions upon fans, is just how the vocals at times just feel very overpowered by a lot of the other instruments here, which is something I do kind of enjoy at times. It's not necessarily my favorite thing in the world, but I feel like it works at certain points here on this album, and just some sort of the other things going on here with the vocals on this project. Like I talked about before, I like the vocals on Flies and how it was just able to bounce back and forth between a more restrained yet tense delivery and just an all-out aggressive delivery. Another track with some pretty interesting vocals was Little Richard, which just has this very manipulated kind of vocal part running through it, which I found to be pretty entertaining. It kind of sets the track apart from some of the others in here for that reason. And moving in a different direction here, I do also like some of the features here on this album. Not necessarily that any of them are super obvious in a more typical fashion. You do have the bassist from Tool providing some work here on this project, as well as the director of Shrek providing a spoken word intro for the song Dilemma. It's a match made in heaven. I mean, what else could I say about it? I also really like how this album is pretty concise and to the point, at only about 37-ish minutes in length. It's relatively short. Even my least favorite cuts on here, the ones that in the context of this album are probably closest to filler than anything else, are still very enjoyable and still hold my attention, so they're not really filler at all. The only thing on here that I feel like kind of didn't really interest me all that much was that outro sort of minute-long thing that they had going in here. And there's not that much of the album overall, and didn't really detract from my enjoyment of the project all that much. I like how this album was overall just to the point, enjoyable, and didn't overstay its welcome. This album overall is just really enjoyable, I feel. I put it on and I just get lost in the music, and I find myself enjoying the vast majority of these songs here. And I like how some of these tracks experiment with some different things, whether that be some more rock-oriented things like on Black Paint, or some more modern hip-hop influences on tracks like Streaky, for example. You have your, of course, typical influences that you would expect on a Death Grips album, punk music, metal, electronic music, of course just more aggressive forms of hip-hop in general. All that stuff you're still going to get here on this project to some extent. But you also have some things on here that are just, a little bit different. It's not like Death Grips decided to move in some radically different direction here on this project. They did stray a little bit from their comfort zone on this project, I feel, though. I guess if we're considering, like, Bottomless Pit or, like, The Money Store as kind of being, Death Grips at their most accessible, at their most, straightforward, I guess you could say, with all their other projects kind of being a, something, tweaking that sound to some extent. This one here, it tweaks the sound that you might find on those albums to some extent, but it doesn't do it in a way that's, radically different than that initial sound. You can still tell that this is a Death Grips album through and through, but it does throw you some surprises here or there. So Death Grips fans, I feel like, are really going to enjoy this project. I mean, I really don't see a reason for you not to all that much here on this project, unless you're just really tired of Death Grips' overall sound. But like I said, they do throw some interesting new things at you here on this project, so you will probably, find those interesting to say the least, unless you just, really don't like those particular things that they decide to throw at you. So yeah, I'm really impressed with how Death Grips are able to keep up the quality for how many, however many projects it's been at this point. They've been around for, almost a decade now, and it seems like every year they're throwing us at least some type of new music, whether it be an EP, an album, something along those lines. And this one is definitely, a worthy addition to the Death Grips discography. So yeah, if you're a Death Grips fan, if you like Death Grips, if you like experimental hip-hop, or if anything I said here in this review, got you interested in this project to any extent, make sure you check it out, because it is a very enjoyable album, and I do highly recommend it. not my favorite Death Grips album, but not my least favorite either. Not that I really dislike any of Death Grips' projects so far. Like I said, they've had a very consistent streak of projects since their beginning almost a decade ago. So yeah, this is a great project overall. I highly recommend it. And with that said, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future music-related content. Comment down below your thoughts on this project. And with that said, thank you guys for watching, and stay gold.